Hello, everyone. This is John Pappas, and I serve as the State Advocacy Director for the I-Development Economic Association, also known as IDEA. Um, this is the second of a three-part series of webinars called the Power Lunch Summit that IDEA is hosting. It's an annual event. Yesterday's excellent briefing focused on um, responsible gaming. It was a really fantastic panel. If you didn't see it already, it will be available on demand, as will this panel later this week. And tomorrow there is another panel on iGaming and what the economic contributions to iGaming is in the states that have licensed and regulated it. And we've got a really great panel set up for that. So I hope if you haven't already registered for that, that you register for it between now and tomorrow. So we do really have an amazing lineup of experts here today. And you may think, based on the title of the panel, that we brought everyone here to talk about fraud and online gambling, but I'm changing it around, and I really got these people here together to get their A1 locks, picks of the week for next week's this weekend's NFL games. So with that, I'm really excited to hear where we should be placing our bets going into week 3 of the NFL season. Okay, nope, I guess that's not actually going to happen. I wanted to, but Jeff, our legal counsel, said, nope, can't do that. So we're going to really talk about fraud, and we think it's an important subject because the stakes are really high for online gaming, because not only are fraudsters getting more sophisticated, regulations are getting more strict, and operators are becoming have to come up with solutions to both combat fraud, but also make a very seamless and enjoyable player experience for legitimate players. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today: is how is fraud impacting the online gaming and sports betting industries, and what is being done to combat it, and how are these emerging technologies and strategies being used to create a safe and fun environment for consumers. Before we move into speaker introductions, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. For anyone who might have questions for the panelists, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please put your questions in there, and we'll try to leave some time at the end for Q&A. And then, as I already mentioned, all of these will be available on demand at the end of this week, and we'll be sure to circulate to those who have attended and those who registered and others, so that they can watch this great discussion. So before we jump into questions, I think it would be appropriate for our panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with David.
Sure, yeah, I'm David Brace. I'm the principal for technology at Continent 8 Technologies, and also at our sister company, C8 Secure. So most of you know us as a technology and security and audit provider to the industry.
Thank you, David. Paul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Resch. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this panel today. I'm Director of Gaming Operations for the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. And within my bureau here at the board, we have day-to-day oversight of our iGaming operators. We have about 23 websites currently up and running in Pennsylvania, and the industry is continuing to grow here. We saw a 27% increase in revenue this past year, up to 2.5 billion. So welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Incredible growth in Pennsylvania, and really been a model for states that are doing both iGaming and sports betting. So thank you, Paul. We look forward to hearing from you. And Nick, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks to everybody for joining. I know we're at the beginning of another exciting NFL season, so appreciate you guys joining for an hour of your time today. But I lead risk strategy here at GeoComply. For those who aren't familiar, GeoComply is a compliance and risk mitigation cybersecurity company. We help protect and provide integrity to a number of partners, not only in the iGaming industry, but also help support a number of crypto exchanges, media and entertainment, and e-commerce. And really excited to be joined by such a great panel today.
Thank you, Nick. And Chrissy, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, Christy Watkins, I'm a senior product manager over our merchant fraud solutions here at WorldPay, which is a payment service provider. And I'm really excited to be on this panel. We service verticals, all verticals, merchants of all sizes, including in the iGaming space. And for me, particularly, I'm excited to join. I've been with WorldPay for 9 years, but 7 years prior, I was actually with Caesars Entertainment in gaming in multiple roles. So this is a great intersection for me to bring my fraud and payments knowledge into the gaming space. So thank you.
Wonderful. Like I said, we have a great panel, but I do actually want to hear from you, the audience, first. I do have a poll question that I'm going to put up. Jody, if you could put up the poll question before we get started. Yep, there it is. And the question is, compared to other e-commerce sectors like retail or travel, how pervasive do you think fraud is in online gaming and sports betting? So I'm gonna give everybody just a second to answer this question, and we're gonna be touching on some answers to this as this panel progresses, but wanted to get your guys' thoughts to kind of level set on where the audience thinks fraud is as a serious issue for the industry. All right, Jody, I think we've given folks enough time to vote. All right, somewhat more pervasive seems to be, and more pervasive. So combined, it looks as if the sentiment is that fraud is more pervasive in iGaming and sports betting than other retail industries. So I'd love to, or online industries, I'd love to explore that a little deeper, but kind of to tee it up, when we talk about online fraud, what do we mean in online gaming? And maybe Nick or David or both of you could chime in on what it means, what type of fraud is being perpetrated, who are the targets, and are the players that are being targeted, or is it the operators that are being targeted by fraud? And that would be a great way to start.
Do you want to go first, Nick?
No, after you, David.
So for me, I think we need to split it into two categories. There's the consumer directly affecting type of fraud. So we're talking account takeovers, suffering from credential stuffing and wallet draining. And then we have the other side of the coin, which is active campaigns targeting casino and online casino and sports betting organizations. So they are one of the top three targets globally for cyber criminals, and that's more of the enterprise targeting. So they're targeting an organization rather than an individual user. Now, I think here we want to talk about what's happening to the users rather than the enterprise. We could spend hours or days talking about how to protect an enterprise. If we focus on the consumer side here, it's account takeovers, same as it's always been. So credential stuffing attacks, harvested credentials that you can buy on the dark web, being targeted at people's accounts with the idea of effectively draining their funds or taking and placing their wages. That's what I see from my side. Nick, if you want to come in.
Yeah, it's all great points, David. And I think in addition to the account takeovers and maybe the stolen credentials and the stolen KYC methods that we're seeing in the space, I think another emerging trend, and I know we'll touch on the know your customer controls a little bit later in the webinar, but we're seeing a really big trend right now of also organized crime or bad actors actually going out and recruiting real individuals off the street. And helping get past that first KYC stage. And then maybe they're instructing or setting up programs to which they're recruiting and giving them stolen funds and doing more traditional money laundering. So I think seen a lot of our partners have really had to come up with really unique and creative solutions where onboarding your customer is no longer just a day one or a one-time thing that they need to put into their controls. Knowing your customer throughout the whole entire customer journey not only helps you protect against some of these mule situations that we're seeing, but similar to like David described, right? Account takeover is always an ongoing threat that individuals need to protect their platform against to maintain the integrity and the security and the trust that their customers have in their platform, and ultimately what makes the regulated gaming market, a safe place for us all to enjoy and participate in.
Thanks. I hope that helps kind of set the stage here. It sounds like, obviously there is an entire area of fraud that's focused on the operators themselves, but consumers and creating a trust environment is imperative for the operators, right? If consumers go to a website and they don't feel like their information is protected, their game is protected, then they're unlikely to use that platform again. So, Christy, as you think about it, you guys at WorldPay have a kind of a global view of the e-commerce sector. Like, what are you guys seeing from a payments perspective, and how does this compare to fraud and other e-commerce sectors that you guys support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the poll was pretty spot on, right? I think it's a little bit more risky and at risk than some of the other verticals, but in very specific ways. So Nick and David, I think, did a great job kind of talking about the dark web and credential stuffing and account takeover. And those really, like those vulnerabilities in the ecosystem lead to that kind of payments fraud, right? Where you start to see kind of the payouts being abused or someone getting into someone's account, potentially card testing. That's one area where gaming actually, because it's kind of behind this login, that's less risky than some of the other verticals where they see card testing at kind of really expansive rates. But account takeover is a big one. Bonus abuse and payments fraud, kind of higher chargebacks, is really prevalent in the online gaming space. I think with chargebacks, you tend to get a mix, right? You do see a little bit more of kind of that friendly fraud, right? Someone's, maybe upset about a win or a loss, right? And they're kind of putting in chargebacks to dispute their deposits. But you definitely have those organized fraudsters who are starting to really exploit kind of the promotional aspects, right? Promo abuse, really trying to game the system. So that's could also be bucketed as friendly fraud, but you're starting to see a lot more, within the gaming space of kind of that social aspect, that promotional aspect, and that being kind of taken advantage through the payments ecosystem and that payments flow.
Chrissy, you mentioned friendly fraud. Can you explain what that means? Like, how is fraud friendly?
Yeah. So I know it's a weird name, right? So friendly fraud is really it is the person. So when you think about like data from all intents and purposes or fraud, you really think of like someone stole my card and they're using it, or someone broke into my account and they used my account in kind of a vulnerable way. Friendly fraud is really I am the person who did it. But now I'm either raising a chargeback or, you have in the gaming space, you have people who are really trying to take advantage of those promotions, right? So understanding they might create different email addresses and try to log in and get, that $10 sign up bonus at multiple times within one merchant. So that is friendly fraud. It really is the person. It's them doing the action behind it, but they're kind of exploiting policies or exploiting kind of promotions to take advantage of the merchant.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Well, it sounds like kind of you, our audience was astute to know that yes, there is significant. It's a significant issue. I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that while it's significant, that the gaming industry is probably well positioned, even more so than other industries, because of the robust KYC requirements up front for registering an account. And I think that's a great segue to talk to Paul and the work that the Gaming Commission has been doing with respect to updating its KYC rules. And I know that there's going to be some new changes that operators have to implement in the next couple of weeks. And I wanted you to kind of share what prompted those changes and kind of how you guys balanced industry feedback with the need to strengthen these protections.
Sure, John. So Pennsylvania launched online sports wagering and iCasino back in 2019. And in the early years, as it is with any new form of gambling, like, for example, Pennsylvania launched land-based table games in 2010. And in those first 6 months to a year of land-based table games, we saw, like every other state does, groups going around to our casinos and looking to take advantage of less experienced dealers, less experienced supervisors, and try to, slide the dice on a craps table or try to, gain a glimpse of the card to gain an advantage in that table game play. So the same thing happened in iGaming here in Pennsylvania, right? So from 2019, for the first couple of years, as our operators launched their platforms, the bad actors out there discovered different ways that they could create accounts without using synthetic identities, for example, or use stolen credit cards and things like that. So it really came to a head back in 2024 when the Gaming Control Board issued a fine against one of our iGaming operators for $97,000 for failing to prevent large-scale fraud from taking place on its platform. And just a few of the facts that came out of that case was one individual created 186 fake accounts in 2019. Between 2020 and 2021, 29 fraudsters opened 277 accounts using 24 stolen credit cards, depositing $250,000 and withdrawing around $80,000 to accounts that that could go unnoticed, right? And so the impetus behind Pennsylvania's efforts here really was born out of our Office of Enforcement Counsel, which is the enforcement arm of our agency. They were investigating these cases as they came to our attention. But at the end of the day, they were unable to bring any enforcement action against these bad actors to place them on, for example, our involuntary exclusion list for iGaming, or even refer them over to law enforcement. We just simply didn't know who they were, and these fraud incidents were going undetected. So our enforcement division really, raised the flag and said, we need to do something here to make sure that account security is uniform across all of our operators in Pennsylvania. And so we set about the process of doing that. We conducted research for the better part of 2024. And along the way, we issued guidances to our industry, such as when someone signs up for an account, there must be a date of birth, must be an exact match. Social Security must be an exact match. And as we went along, we issued those type of guidances. But more recently here in January, the board issued guidance that will require iGaming operators to strengthen the account registration process in a couple of ways. One is players will be required to upload a driver's license or a state-issued photo identification. They will be required to take a live selfie so that the picture on the identification matches the live selfie that's taken. These changes are going to take effect September 30th, here in a few weeks. And we really are expecting, fraud to continue to decline as a result of these new security features that players will have to step through that process at the account onboarding.
Paul, were these taken from another industry that was, using this as kind of their standards and best practices, or was this something that's unique to iGaming?
So it's very common to what I think we're all getting used to in our e-commerce transactions, right? As we were working on this project, I talked to people, friends and family who said, yeah, I applied for a Lowe's credit card online and they required me to do this, to scan my driver's license front and back and to take a live selfie. So we're seeing this more and more in our interactions when we're online, when we're using apps. And so, to be one of the operators here in Pennsylvania voluntarily took this step in November of 2024. They started to implement these strong digital identity verification protocols on their own before our guidance was even issued. So based on, the feedback that we heard from that operator is that it was something like a 94% conversion rate in the early weeks and months of them doing that. And we were surprised by that. We thought for sure, well, if people can just sign up for another iGaming operator without going through those identity verification steps, they surely won't get many new accounts, and people won't step through the process. But they did. And it was probably a combination of factors. The user journey was probably very seamless, and there was a new player promotion offer waiting for them at the other end of the process. So that was also an incentive for them to step through that. So the answer is that, one of our operators was doing it. We did extensive research, talked to all of the companies here on this webinar, the panelists with me. We talked to payment providers. We talked to digital identity verification providers, and we talked to all of our operators, and we actually put draft guidance out to them and gave them an opportunity to weigh in on any questions or suggested changes to it.
Thanks, Paul. I know that this was a thorough operation and data collection by the commission there. Nick, one of the words that he said, or phrases he said, was conversion rate. As we think about kind of stricter KYC, stricter onboarding processes to help eliminate fraud, this conversion rate is something critically important to operators. How does a company like GeoComply work in this space to, help these operators with their conversion rate? Is there anything that you can do? Like, how are you guys viewing it? And is there, like, what can be done to both help make sure that fraud's stopping at the door, but that legitimate players are getting in?
Yeah, I think any risk vendor and operator relationship has to be focused around telling a story through data and being able to make informed decisions about how to open up that customer funnel. So I think that's one of the things that we're looking to work with our partners on is, outside maybe some of the controls that Paul just described, are there other ways of authenticating the user session and increasing the player experience? I think the approach that Paul just described is certainly going to have a positive impact on fraud, but are we able to still also measure right the rest of the consumer experience? I think in our experience, we've seen when bad actors target the iGaming industry, some of these more sophisticated and advanced groups can spike to sometimes between 1 and 2.5% of an active user base, right? And that can potentially result in, 7-figure losses, for example, right? So how do we kind of find that balance between a blanket approach for the entire customer experience, or can we actually create progressional step up? And I think that's really where, for example, GeoComply is really trying to drive our innovation and research development. We know that in the KYC space, there's a number of vulnerabilities, right, that artificial intelligence could potentially be used to create fake IDs or that live validation. So what are things that maybe you can't go out onto the dark web or you can't use AI today to generate? That's really where we're trying to work with our partners to drive new and creative and smarter KYC intelligence so that they can ultimately keep that funnel open while still protecting their business and staying compliant to the evolving regulations.
David, I see you nodding there. I'd love for you to weigh in as well.
I was just thinking we did very well in getting to 24 minutes before somebody mentioned AI. The topic du jour, and Nick is right. There have been a number.
Prediction markets is next.
Yeah. There've been a number of very well-researched studies and information security examples where AI image generation can fool most likeness tests. But like everything, there's technologies coming out from the providers to combat that. And I think one of the things we have to focus on is you can't make everything 100% secure. You have to make it to the point where using these technologies is so complex that the juice is not worth the squeeze. If you require $1 million worth of hardware to be able to fool one likeness check with an AI video, it's not worth it to get out the other end. And that's where I think we should be from a security point of view, is you have to make it so it doesn't obstruct the user flow, but also it's complex enough that to defeat it is more expensive than any potential reward. And I think we're going to come on to it later, but one of the additional security measures you can look to implement, and a number of operators has done, is multi-factor authentication. And it's one of those things where initially it's a security thing. You have two-factor authentication, you have three-factor authentication. But one of the things we've discovered in our rollout with clients is properly implemented, multi-factor authentication product actually increases the logon success rate. I don't know if you guys are the same, but for me, passwords are the bane of my life. And every time we push more complex password requirements, the login success rate drops. That's where we have to be thinking about additional technologies in terms of passkeys, in terms of passwordless authentication, biometrics, and actually implementing those not only increases security, it reduces user friction and increases logon success rate. And that's kind of the dream, is something that both boosts player protection and security, but also reduces friction.
Thank you, David. Christy, as you think about, what Pennsylvania is doing specifically, or more generally, how are you guys adapting, how you guys operate on a fraud, and is this impacting how you guys work with your vendors or with your clients?
Yeah, I think, everybody brought up great points about kind of the different ways of authenticating. And that is one of the areas where I think gaming has an advantage in some of the other verticals, right? Is you're collecting a lot of data up front from the client, right? And you're getting a lot of verification. My kind of goal and kind of what we've been working on, and I would say my word of the year for 2026, especially as we start to think about AI and synthetic identity and agentic AI, is data. Right? How do we make sure that we do a better job of taking the data that we're receiving and moving it through the ecosystem silently and behind the scenes? So, it was talked about device, fingerprinting, behavioral analytics, those types of kind of security measures where if we're checking them, we're getting, geolocation validation. How do we allow that to flow downstream into the payments, into the account login, into the payouts, so that we're kind of creating this web of information and knowledge around the activities. Whereas I think historically, a lot of these checks and verifications operate in silos, right? So you do the kind of the KYC check, and then you do an account login check, and then you do kind of the payments check. And so, I think our goal is really starting to build connections better, making sure that, when our merchants have data, that we're getting the right data, and we're using and optimizing how we use the data in a meaningful way, especially as we start to think about these new, where things can be spoofed. IP addresses can start being spoofed. AI is really getting great at even some of the behavioral and acting like a human. You have human farms of people doing some of this behavior. So it's also about finding those new data indicators that are going to be indicative of fraud, right? So now we have all of this kind of new fraud that's populating. And so our historical kind of view of data and what looks like fraudulent isn't going to continue in the future, right? We really have to start looking at the data, get as much of it as possible, and find those new indicators of fraud and look for those new trends that are popping up, and start again leveraging it throughout the ecosystem, throughout the entire customer journey with an operator, rather than just kind of in these individual kind of interactions.
What you said there is kind of a great segue to another question I had lined up for later, but I'll ask it now to Paul. She's talking about new evolving fraud and keeping up with things, and the data from 2 years ago is no longer relevant today. How are you guys thinking about it? You guys issued these new guidance, you have new regulations. What's to say that these regulations aren't going to be outdated 6 months from now? What are you doing to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so, I listened to the webinar yesterday. It was a great webinar on responsible gambling, and the representative from DraftKings used the term that I jotted down: advanced adaptive identity verification, right? And so the light bulb goes off. That's, what Pennsylvania is doing as a first step to try to strengthen account security in the iGaming space. It's just the first step, right? When we issue guidance and regulations as regulators, we like to include a catch-all statement like, or any other method approved by the board, right? So that gives us flexibility. It doesn't paint us into a corner where we really like a new technology, but we can't allow it. And so, I think, today it's the ID upload with the liveness check and some other protocols that we've rolled out. But next year, we've heard about all of these technologies that are evolving quickly, things, data that can be gathered from banking and financial transactions and the like. And I think that we're definitely going to be open to those new technologies. But I think this gets the conversation started here in Pennsylvania. It lets the operators know that, yes, best practices will be accepted, of course, but we want to make sure that all of our operators, there's like a minimum, standard that everyone's doing this, that no one's at a competitive disadvantage, because it's much more difficult for a regulator to really peel back the layers of the onion to determine, is this operator's verification, know your customer process acceptable? So that's where we are. It's a starting point.
Yeah. Nick, earlier you'd said something that caught my attention. You said something about that fraud prevention and KYC needs to be something that goes through the life cycle of the player. How is this done in a way that isn't so intrusive for the customer? Are there ways of kind of continually KYCing and monitoring fraud without being too intrusive with the player experience?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. And maybe just to clarify and to be more detailed, I think it's a lot of some of the elements that Christy brought up about taking existing data points that are already kind of bucketed at certain parts of that customer journey and starting to like link those together. So before GeoComply, I was working for one of like the major operators, and one of the challenges I faced at the operator level and like my day-to-day is like the data is kind of split up between, okay, here's my KYC registration page, right? Now here's my deposit information, here's my withdrawal information, and oh, can I even get a hold of like my trading team to start to mix that data together? And I think that's really what, ongoing KYC needs to be is, can you not necessarily be prompting the user to submit their KYC details over and over again, but can you capture existing data today and be able to link that together to say that, okay, I'll go back to my example in the beginning with some of these recruited mules or some of the account brokerage that we're starting to see in the space is, you have these accounts that are passing data verification and KYC, a healthy profile is built up, but now all of a sudden there's a drastic change. But where does that drastic change come from, right? Is it a geolocation where all of a sudden they were, in Arizona for a long time and now they're in, lower Manhattan, New Jersey? Is it a change in the deposit patterns that could potentially signal a responsible gambling check-in? Is it something along the lines of, their gameplay, the patterns and how their wagering is changing? So I don't think we need to be KYCing at every single point, but there is certainly a unified call, and I think a lot of the operators are starting to stitch that puzzle together of linking all of these data points at multiple parts of the journey, and finding those unique data points to say, okay, even at a behavioral level, what has changed? Maybe we don't even care who or how much or what they're wagering on, right? Is there elements of who's behind that screen that we can capture through already existing data points? And I think a number of the panelists have hit on that today, that those data points exist. It's just about putting that storyline together.
David, you've come off mute.
Yeah, I was just gonna to jump in and say there's one of the prime examples of use of AI and big data is exactly as Nick described. It's there is so much data generated, and that's one of the key things that AI is good at, is analyzing massive data sets and then flagging anomalies. So as Nick said, there are so many things you can do with the data that's gathered as a matter of course. So we talk about, not only normal biometrics, but there's behavioral biometrics. So, the way you interact with your touchscreen, the frequency of pressing, how long you press, builds up a hidden portfolio and a hidden identity of how you are. So even though as Nick said, the accounts can pass all of the KYC checks, all of the authentication checks. If they're of drastically different behavior profile, that should be a prompt for a re-authentication or a recheck. So it's things you can do in the background with the data you already gather. And that was the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I mean, we're having this discussion, and I'm thinking, God, if someone's just listening to this, they're going to think this is like such a scary place. But in reality, like we kind of let off, is that there is so much information and data collected in this industry compared to other industries that I actually think that fraud prevention is probably much more feasible in the iGaming space. Christy, what are your thoughts on that? And as you think about like how are some of your customers outside of gaming doing it wrong? What could they learn from the gaming industry, if you're able to talk about that? And then, I'd love to get others' perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, again, gaming has a great foundation of having a lot of data. And what we've seen kind of from fraud prevention perspective and using AI and machine learning to do exactly that is when we're getting the more data we're getting fed into our machines and in our AI, the more that we can kind of check against all of the other behavior that those data points are kind of within our system, right? And you can identify risky behavior. You can look for those types of behaviors of when they typically make a deposit, when they typically pay out, how many deposits are they making within a certain time frame, and we look for those anomalies. And again, with gaming, we get a lot of times customer ID is a really great data point, just as a foundational level, right? If we think some basics and don't think too big pie in the sky of all of these new data and AI type data that we're going to have to start thinking about, is customer ID and email address, right? Those two data points alone can really provide a ton of value from fraud prevention within the payment space. And a lot of times those are being used. And it's about just making sure that it's being passed. And that's where gaming stands out, right? You have a lot of other kind of industries where they're not so connected to an account. They don't always have a customer ID or some sort of identifier of the customer. So then we're trying to link together other data elements like a card, right? And we're trying to identify behavior on a card rather than being able to look at it from the customer level, which provides kind of that enhanced value. You can really start to kind of web out and kind of future look at kind of behaviors and linking fraud groups together, especially in the promotions of use space. So I think that's kind of where we really see kind of that basic value of starting to use the data that you have and passing it through to us and allowing us to leverage it, not only for fraud prevention, but I think one of the areas that has become really important in fraud from a payment space and operators care a lot about is optimization, right? Authorization rates. And it's not just that the more data that you're providing us will allow us to reduce your fraud, is the more data you're providing us will allow us to also reduce the false positives or the impact to your good traffic, right? So the more information we have, we're just making better decisions overall. And it really becomes an optimization play at that point too, to improve put more money in your pocket. Because we have more data, we can be better at our decisioning. And then, as we think about the ecosystem, start sharing that data downstream to issuers and things like that.
Very interesting. Paul, I'm going to take a question that was put into the audience chat here for you. They asked, for the upcoming KYC changes, will existing account holders be required to go through a re-verification process? This is a two-part question. The other part is, what about people with an account from out of state and they used it in PA for the first time? When you think about operators that have universal wallets, someone's account is, someone's app it goes across multiple jurisdictions. Will that patron need to go through the stepped up KYC process in Pennsylvania before they're able to place a bet there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our guidance did address that. This is a going forward guidance in the sense that it only applies to new accounts created. So starting October 1st, everyone who has an existing account on the 20 plus websites here in Pennsylvania will be able to continue to use that account. There's no impact to them, but it'll be those new registrations that will have to go through the strengthened identity verification protocol. So we're really interested. We just had a call with GeoComply on Monday our regular monthly call. And we're really interested in tracking the data, around new accounts going forward under the new KYC requirements. So we're going to watch that closely. Here in Pennsylvania, it'll be a level playing field. So if someone, is concerned about providing that digital identity, that document upload and that live selfie, if they choose to go to another operator, they're going to face the same requirement there. So it's a level playing field. And that was important to the industry. I think it's why more operators didn't go out on their own and voluntarily implement this, is that operators want they want a level playing field, and they want to know, predictability in the market. So that's how it will work. We do have a requirement in the guidance that when the identification expires here in Pennsylvania, our driver's licenses are good for 4 years. When the driver's license expires, we do have a requirement that our operators step their existing account users through an identity verification process, but that will be down the road. And the question about operators that have single account, single wallet that travels across state lines, the guidance addresses that and says if the person creates their account in another jurisdiction under less stringent KYC protocols, when they use the account in Pennsylvania for the first time, again, if it's a new account created after October 1st, they'll have to step through the KYC process that we require here. So we did anticipate that, and we made provisions for it. I think that players, the difference between the legal regulated space and the unregulated offshore illegal sites are that there's the requirements are less stringent. And I think what we're seeing across the US, when players are informed that certain websites are illegal, they choose to do business in the legal regulathe space.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
a lot of reasons for doing that.
Yeah, because you talked about the level playing field, and as I think about the industry at large, there is, yes, competition amongst your regulated operators, but the industry, as you know, is also fighting against the unregulated operators, offshore sports books and offshore casinos that don't play by the rules and probably are okay with 18-year-olds depositing money on their accounts where the U.S. market, regulated market, doesn't. So how do you balance that to make sure that what you guys are proposing isn't going to turn a consumer off to the regulated market and say,
Sure.
Well, I don't want to jump through all those hoops to place a bet legally. I'll just use XYZ book based in Antigua.
Yeah. So the Pennsylvania Gaming Act has, right at the very top of the legislation that was passed in 2004, and I know because I worked in the House of Representatives at the time, the primary objective of the Gaming Act is to protect the public through the regulation of gaming. And so as a regulator, that's my job first and foremost, is to protect the public. And so the public includes users, players on the sports wagering sites and on the iGaming sites. The public also includes the operators and the industry as a whole. And so when we make decisions, we don't rush into them. We don't do so without soliciting input from all the stakeholders in this process. But at the end of the day, we have to make our decisions based on what's best for this industry going forward. And in order to do that, we need account security that starts right at the front door, right at the gate. And it's a tough question, and we're going to watch very closely, of course, the new account registrations and the conversion rates and things like that from the industry. And we operate from the premise that people, when they're informed and educated, they will choose to do business with legal, regulated businesses that pay taxes here in the Commonwealth, and their games are tested for fairness and all the things that we stand for with regulation in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that consumers going to gravitate to the legal market. We see that when new markets open up, right? We know that the legal market diminishes. We've seen data that shows how that's changed when new markets open up and consumers gravitate to the regulated market. Nick, I wanted to ask you as we talk about kind of um, industry, regulators, vendors. How are you guys all collaborating, not just in Pennsylvania, but in other states to kind of fight fraud? Are you guys siloed, or is everyone kind of working together to create solutions here?
Yeah, I think it's a dynamic relationship, John. Like at the end of the day, I think for GeoComply and their partners, we're very closely tied at the hip, and we're very fortunate to be able to work side by side to again have data-driven stories to ultimately help inform not only consumer protection, but what's ultimately going to be a good experience. And like Paul just mentioned, like just because there are new regulations and rules that are coming forth, in the immediate, that doesn't mean that regulators are not open to evolving those regulations. And I think that's where we see kind of the key, success in any of those partnerships or that relationship triangle is, to stay ahead of bad actors, you need to be dynamic. And all parts of that relationship triangle need to have an open conversation. It can't be one-sided, because I think once you find that one-sided part of the triangle, again, those control weaknesses that the bad actors are testing daily, if not hourly, those are evolving very, very quickly. So you have to be able to tell that data-driven story and let those facts make the informed decisions.
Very cool. We have another question from the audience that I wanted to ask. It says, "Can anyone on the panel?" And I'm thinking I'm going to direct this to David. Can anyone on the panel talk about how platforms secure personal data that's collected at account registration, and what they're doing to protect from a potential fraudulent data breach?
That could be a very, very long answer.
How about the one that's going to be less than 12 minutes?
Less than 12 minutes. Okay, we'll try and make it less than 1 minute. Now, I think one of the things we tend to forget when focusing specifically on iGaming is a lot of our organizations and our operators have a whole bunch of other rules and frameworks they must adhere to. So those involving payments, if they're on, one of the stock exchanges, the SEC rules. So there are a large number of rules out there already that categorize how to handle personal identifiable data. I'm sure Christy can attest the same apply in the financial industries of how you handle credit card data and that kind of thing. So, all of the licensed and the regulatory bodies such as pools, insist on the operators adhering to PCI compliance and SOC 2 compliance and ISO compliance for handling of data. I think the important thing to understand is, none of the operators we personally deal with as a company are looking to scrimp on any of these rules or avoid any. They're looking to implement the best security they can to protect their player data, because it is the key, and I know I briefly mentioned enterprise security. The main thing people are after is not necessarily player data as a whole. It's to take your organization down, and player data is one of those cherries on top. So it's all the standard things out there. So there's encryption of data at rest, encryption of data in transit. And a lot of it comes down to rules and policies. So there's procedures, there's policies, there's how they implement, there's who has access to the data, should they have access to the data, there's audit logs. There's an extensive list of things we can do. And one of the things I was very interested to hear Paul talk about was looking, when they're shaping their regulations, at other industries and verticals, because a lot of this stuff already exists. And I think most people can rest assured that the operators we deal with are implementing all of these things. So a roundabout way in saying the absolute best they can is what they're doing.
Fantastic.
So, John,
Go ahead, Paul.
just to jump in there real quick, as David said, these businesses have to adhere to a number of other rules and regulations at the state and federal levels. What we do at the Gaming Control Board here is we require in our regulations data to be encrypted, as David said, at rest and in transit. But but it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to prove it out. So we require all of our iGaming operators and manufacturers to have an annual IT security audit performed. And they have to provide that audit to us, and they have to provide their remediation action plan to us. Do they accept the risk if it's a small risk? What are they going to do to address any IT security issues? So, and particularly with our guidance that we just issued, what happens if a player doesn't pass through the automated KYC process? Digital, the ID upload and the selfie liveness and the comparison. If they don't pass through the automated process, each operator has a manual process. And so, for example, a new player might have to upload a utility bill. We're all used to doing this sort of thing, and go through a manual review where there's human involvement. We're gonna make sure and require that the transmission of that data is done securely. It's not done by email or anything along those lines. And so all of our operators will have robust processes in place for protecting PII, protecting individuals' data from being scooped up.
Great. Jody, I want to ask another poll question of the audience to get their thoughts as we're kind of looking ahead. The last poll question is going to be, which of the following do you think will pose the greatest fraud challenge for the online gaming industry over the next 2 to 3 years? There are a few options here. I'll give everybody a minute to respond to those, and then would love to kind of close out the discussion with our panelists here before our time runs out. All right, we can probably close down the poll now. Love to see the results. All right, AI. That, not surprisingly, because I don't think anybody knows what the future of AI is. I think everyone may keep people up at night. To that, Nick, what keeps you up at night as you think about kind of potential fraud that your company and that the industry overall is going to have to fight moving forward?
Great question, John. Not a lot keeps me up at night. Certainly not wearing a tie like you today. That's going to probably give me some nightmares today. But I think the thing that is top of mind for me is speed and velocity are, I think, kind of the key drivers of what's driving a lot of the fraud in the regulated iGaming industry. I think our audience, when they did their initial poll to start, that probably is something that resonates a lot with them. And I think one of the things that we have to continue to invest in and is going to be really important is, especially with new technologies like stablecoins, for instance, right? Payments, KYC is just going to get faster and faster, right? So we're going to have to be able to keep up with, again, identifying those more non-traditional behavioral patterns that I think a lot of the panel has touched on today. So I think one of the things that I can even see in some of our data is even an over-reliance on device fingerprinting is something that we have to start looking forward to new technology. And that's where I know for us, a lot of our research and development is going into not making a new device fingerprint, but supplementing existing location data, precise location data today that goes beyond just IP. That's an excellent tool that can come and help complement what is, I think, definitely a challenge. So the over-reliance on device fingerprinting is something that I think all operational teams are trying to weigh out and see if it's how it's going to play in their long-term risk strategy.
Chris, your thoughts on that? What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely AI synthetic identity is a big one. I also am really starting to think about, okay, how does kind of these agentic AI agent commerce kind of starting to play? How will that impact the gaming space, right? When a consumer is now giving their credentials to an agent, and allowing them to make deposits on their behalf or any sort of gaming on their behalf, right? How does that play? But I also have this other concern of like, there's all this future stuff that's moving really fast that these fraudsters, the technology we have, they also have. They have way less red tape that they have to go through, right? No regulatory, no compliance. These fraudsters can run at a much faster speed with the technology, so they can use it in a more fraudulent way. But I'm also worried about keeping our eye on kind of the legacy fraud issues, right? So there was that kind of bottom one of payments fraud and traditional fraud. And I'm acutely aware of, while we're all looking right and preparing for the future, there will be fraudsters that's kind of scoop in and go, okay, now they're starting to kind of forget, right? Those traditional checks are being bypassed. Everybody's trying to think about the next thing. So to me, it's like, oh, we're going to have all this new fraud and synthetic identity, and that's scary. But how do we just make sure we're not moving, but we are expanding our fraud protections, right? And keeping the fraud protections that work and making sure we're continuing to advance with our traditional fraud, but also now pulling into scope these new kind of fraud trends that are going to pop up. So those are synthetic identity, but also making sure that we don't let the whole ecosystem doesn't start to collapse as we shift our view one way.
David, I know you have a king size bed. You're a large, tall man. How do you sleep at night? What keeps you up?
I'm going to go against the poll results and actually say it's people that keep me up at night. So the biggest risk that we see from an organizational point of view, if you look at all of the incidents that have happened with gaming companies, with some regulators in other states, not polls, with some state and congressional bodies, it's people. It's actually very difficult to hack into an organization from the outside. It's much easier to use people to get in. So social engineering, and yes, I'm going to say AI, but AI augmented social engineering is the biggest risk we all face. The AI generated voice calls, the text messages, the tricking people to give their credentials. So that's, as Christy said, it's one of the big focuses. We should, yes, look at new technology, but they're being used to enhance the traditional methods of fraud. That would be my thing. So people.
Interesting. And Paul, as a regulator, I know you never sleep. Little twist on the question, because we are talking a lot about AI. Like, what are you hearing, or are you hearing anything from the legislature? I know a lot of state legislatures are looking at AI and AI policy. Are you seeing this, anything that the Pennsylvania legislature may be looking at that could bleed into how AI impacts the gaming industry?
Yeah, no, personally, I'm not aware of any legislation here in Pennsylvania. We do have an Office of Legislative Affairs that keeps close tabs on legislation introduced. I've not heard of anything that would impact gaming at this point, but certainly is a topic that's on the forefront of everyone's minds. And as regulators, we're learning like everybody else. And from our experience, I can say over the last year and a half, we've really educated ourselves on this topic of fraud and all of the solutions that are out there and that are emerging. And so the same thing will apply to AI. We will continue to learn and evolve our regulations because technology changes quickly, whether it's the latest slot machine or the iGaming platforms that we interact with.
Thanks. Well, guys, we are drawing near an end of our panel. This has really been a fascinating discussion, one that I think is really timely and important given where this industry is headed. We already answered a lot of the questions from the audience. We weren't able to get to all of them, but I did want to keep it to our time frame. So just a reminder that there is a third and final Power Lunch series webinar tomorrow at noon. This is going to be discussing iGaming, and the panelists are going to showcase real-world examples of how online gaming revenue is being reinvested into education, infrastructure, and community programs, while exploring kind of the broader economic impact of this legal industry. You can always register if you haven't already at ideagrowth.org. And on the website, you can also access all of our exclusive research and news and analysis and infographics. Here is the moderator. Here is the panel for tomorrow. And I really thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to having these discussions in the future. Thank you, everyone.